Welcome, everyone, and thank you all for the reimagining, designing, innovating, and thinking to the edges that you're all doing every day that brought you here to be with us in this conversation today. Just to kind of figure out who's here with us today, raise your hand, stand up, make some noise if you're currently an educator in a school. Yeah. What about if you're a coach, that coaching teachers working in a school in another capacity? School leaders? Okay, let's go with teachers again. Teachers? Yeah, okay. What about entrepreneurs? Yeah, okay. Nonprofit professionals? All right. Anything that I missed, yell and cheer for yourself. Yell it out. Alumni? Okay. Awesome. Okay, let's just do teachers one more time. Teachers? Okay. That's good. So we are going to start off today with kind of getting our brains tingling and our minds thinking to the edges with a talk, what I like to call a Todd Talk by Todd Rose. It's actually more of a kind of mix between a TED Talk and a book talk from his new book, The End of Average. And I'm not supposed to be advertising, but I've really, really, really enjoyed reading it. While the research and context that Todd will share with us truly, I believe, is transformational, mind-boggling, and really just provocative, it also, for me, felt really grounding, and it provides us a scientific and historical context to think about a lot of the work that we're already doing in our schools to reimagine education and ensure that we're reaching all of our students, that so many of us in the room, especially everyone in a school, is doing every single day. What he shares with us, all of this science and history and great thinking, we, after that, get to hear from Jamie Stewart, who's an alum from Washington, D.C. in 2007. Any other 2007 alum in here? Woo! And so then she'll take us on a deep dive into a little bit of the work that they're doing at alt schools in reimagining education, and she'll share a little bit about what that actually looks like on the ground. After that, in our three-part case study, we get to hear from a panel of amazing innovators, some alumni, some friends of ours, who are going to talk a little bit about the work that they do in mentoring and across contexts to reimagine education. And so we're really excited about all three parts of these. Hopefully we'll have time for Q&A, and if not, don't worry, there's definitely an opportunity to follow up after this that we'll share at the end. So without further ado, I would love to welcome Todd Rose. Over here on the floor.
On the floor because I like to pace, and I'm sure I'll fall off this narrow stage. Funny, but not as good for the talk. So I think most of us here are here because we get the sense that our traditional industrial kind of batch process model of education isn't quite fulfilling its mission, and that at some level we think the solution involves some kind of more personalized experience for students, and I agree, but what I want to try to make a case for today is that I think we've got the science and we've got the technology to actually get to an education system that develops all instead of just some, and we can do personalization, but the biggest obstacle in my mind is actually a mindset. It's this attachment we have to what I'll say is the myth of the average student. So all I want to do today is use some examples from my book to do two things. One, to show you that there actually is honestly no such thing as an average person. That this idea that seems so familiar is actually like profoundly flawed and holding us back. And then show you, if we're not going to use averages to understand kids, what can we put in its place? And so I'll introduce you to the three principles of individuality from this science that I'm a part of. So those are the two things I want to do. When I say there's no such thing as an average person, so my first encounter with this idea of the failure of average actually happened in 2002. I was doing my doctoral work and working at Mass General Hospital in Boston, doing brain imaging. And like most fields of science, the way we do imaging is if you're part of my study, we'll bring you in, we'll put you in a scanner, and we'll give you some kind of task, and then we'll get a pattern from your brain, And then we do this thing really automatically without thinking much about it. We would average together all of your patterns, and we produce an average brain. And that's what gets published. And of course, the underlying assumption, without even thinking about it, is that average has to kind of represent some people, right? Like, it'd be kind of weird to use it otherwise. So I was learning imaging, and I thought, this is exciting. And then a paper came out that completely shook our field. And it's by a colleague of mine named Mike Miller. And Mike was doing what I think was a pretty straightforward study on how the brain retrieves memory. It's so simple. And if you would have asked me 15 years ago, what do we know for sure in neuroscience? I would have said, we know the brain areas involved in memory retrieval, right? We just have so many studies on it, on average. So Mike is doing this study, and he does this familiar thing, puts people in a scanner, gives them the task, gets results, and he produces this. This is the average brain from Miller's study on these are the areas that are involved in memory retrieval. And it looks just like every other average brain map we've seen in this area, except for Mike happened to notice something. He told me he was in the scanning room when one person he called, their pattern was weird. And I was like, that's a technical term. It's a weird brain pattern. And it didn't look right, so he was kind of got worried. And he thought, I wonder how many of the individual brain scans looked anything like the average one that he just produced. So he goes back and he looks at every single one. Let me just give you a few examples of what he found. And these are all people who could do the task just fine. There's one person's brain, another person's brain, another one. I could keep going on and on. Here's what he found. Not a single person, not one brain actually looked anything like the average brain. He's worried. Now, you would think you just hurry and publish it and tell people about it, but he's like, I think I made a mistake. And these are the things that ruin your career when you publish something and they're like, you just don't know what you're doing, right? So he puts it in the file cabinet, but he kind of bothers them for a while. 6 months later, he decides he's going to do another study. He brings the exact same people back, puts them in the exact same scanner, gives them the same task, gets the same exact results. The average represented nobody, and each individual brain was doing the task in a unique way. And later on, by getting beyond average, we discovered that there were different patterns reflecting different strategies brains would use to recall memory, using more visual, more verbal, stuff like that, right? So this shook our field. We started questioning a lot of things, like you can't use group averages to understand individuals. Now, it turns out this is not just about neuroscience. Over the last decade, in every single field where we've actually looked, we've found the exact same thing. Turns out there's no such thing as an average cell. There's no such thing as an average genome. There's no such thing as average cancer, and on and on. And what I think is the most important lesson for education, we know for sure there's no such thing as an average student, right? But if you accept this sort of myth of average, then it's not hard to see what the problem is. Our entire educational system, the industrial model, is built on the assumption that there is an average student, that it's meaningful. And just think about it. We design our textbooks to be age appropriate, which sounds really good, except for it just means that it's designed for the average of what kids know and can do at that age. When we do standardized assessments, norm reference ones, we literally are comparing our kids in terms of how far they deviate from a hypothetical average student. And we even set our pace of learning and the sequence of learning based on what kids know and can do on average. And the truth is, look, it wasn't a bad starting point for an industrial model that was about batch processing. And it wasn't accidental, because the people that built our system were actually the same people who built our original factory models, and they were obsessed with averages because it worked so well when you want to treat workers like cogs. It's a really good way to do things. But I think, that not to state the obvious, I mean, things have changed, right? We know that we can't just have batch processing anymore, that we need to develop talent instead of just sorting it. And if that's true, then we can't just deal with averages. We actually have to understand kids as individuals. Now, here's the thing. That sounds good, and the truth is, 10, 15 years ago, I'm not sure we would have known how, quite honestly. but I believe we do know now. So what I want to spend the rest of my time with is talking to you about some of the insights from this new field that I'm a part of called the science of the individual. And it's a field that's swept a whole bunch of different disciplines, including medicine, but also human development, and it's slowly making its way into the way we think about hiring employees and the way we think about educating. In fact, every major advancement in personalized medicine has come from this new method that gets beyond average and focuses on patterns of individuality. So for the rest of my time, I just want to talk about 3 principles that we use to understand individuals and give you a couple of examples from the book. Again, the book has a lot more detail. Jaggedness, context, and pathways. So the first principle that we talk about is called jaggedness, and it's simply stated as this. All human characteristics that we care about are multidimensional and cannot be reduced to a single score, ever. Now, that sounds good. I think most people agree with it, but it's not hard to think about how we do this all the time in education. But let me give you a concrete example of what I mean when I say people are jagged. And it starts that the very first time that we ever realized there was no such thing as an average body size. And it was in early 1950s, the US Air Force had this enormous problem. So they just got the dawn of jet fighters, right? We had all this great technology, and we'd spent a lot of money on it, and we were getting terrible results. Like pilots just flat out couldn't perform. And they couldn't figure it out. It was like this weird puzzle, and they blamed everybody. They blamed the technology. They eventually got around to blaming flight instructors, like bad teaching. And they keep trying everything, and nothing worked. And they figured it out eventually that it was the cockpit, and I'll explain what I mean. So obviously, you can only build a plane with one cockpit, right? You want to standardize it to try to get scale. So the biggest challenge has always been, hey, look, people have different body sizes. So how would you design a cockpit, one, that could accommodate the widest range of pilots, potentially? So the thinking since the very beginning of military design had always been you design for an average-sized pilot. You take 10 dimensions of size that matter, height, weight, those kind of things, and you find that middle on each one, and you design for that person. It sounds so intuitive, like that should accommodate most people. So they were busy building to try to solve this problem. They thought, maybe our pilots have gotten bigger, so they're going to design this massive new study to get the updated version of the average pilot to design the cockpits. And they hired this 23-year-old guy named Gilbert Daniels, who is absolutely my favorite person in the world right now. He's like 91. I found him for the book. He's just great. So he gets brought in. He just graduated in physical anthropology. He didn't want it to have anything to do with military, but he knew human bodies. And they put him to work measuring 4,000 pilots, 147 dimensions of size. And he's the guy with the tape measure, like this. And they said, just get us the better average. But he had this hunch that the fundamental problem was the idea of average. So he did, as part of his study, he asked the most simplest of questions that no one had actually asked before. He just said, look, of the 4,000 pilots that I'm studying, how many are actually average on these 10 dimensions that matter most for cockpit design? And no kidding, when he presented this idea to the generals, they were like, what a waste of time. Of course we know that most people will be average, right? But what he found, literally zero. There wasn't, and these were white male pilots that were picked because they were close to average. Not a single one, in fact, less than 3% were average on 3 dimensions. So immediately Gilbert Daniels figures out there's no such thing as an average body size. And to their credit, the military responded immediately by banning the use of averages in design. And they solved their problem. That's not the point of this talk, but what I want to tell you is why there was no average pilot, because it will matter for education too. Here's what he found. When he looked at these different dimensions, these are just a handful that really matter for design of cockpits, among other things. In our heads, we kind of imagine size being one-dimensional, right? There's big people, and then there's like a medium-sized person that's kind of a miniature reproduction, we kind of think of it very one-dimensionally, but what he found was that every single pilot had what we call a jagged profile. They were high on some dimensions, they were in the middle on others, and they were low on some dimensions, every single one of them. And so this is why, if you're going to design something right down the middle, it actually was a bad fit for most people, and it caused the problem. So here's the thing. They solved that problem. It would be an interesting story if it was about body size alone, but it's not. Every time we've looked at other aspects of human characteristics, we see the same thing. Jaggedness everywhere we look. This is actually, sorry, it's probably a little dark on this one, but two women, let's just use intelligence, for example. This is scores on subtests of a commonly used adult intelligence scale. Both these women have average IQs of 103. So if we don't care to know them, that 103 is probably good enough. But if we actually wanted to know enough about these women to be able to nurture them, to provide good strategies to develop their talent, it would really matter that one woman is strong on verbal and weak on spatial, and vice versa, right? So we see this everywhere. Jaggedness is the absolute starting point for understanding individuals. It's not hard to see the problem, though, whether it's designing on average with our textbooks. Do you know in California there are laws on the books about how heavy a textbook can be? Absolutely nothing about how flexible it has to be. Nothing. We're so used to average-based thinking. Now, I will say in the book I talk about, this has huge implications for our obsession with one-dimensional standardized tests. You think you can capture someone's potential that way, and you can't. The second principle, so we start with jaggedness, is context. And simply stated is this: it is meaningless to talk about behavior, learning, or ability independent of the immediate environment in which the child is behaving and performing. And that seems obvious if anyone's ever been in a classroom. I mean, obviously context matters. But our whole psychology and neuroscience and stuff has been built around the assumption that it doesn't, right? So think about, for example, how often we talk about traits and we talk about kids as if they possess something that's part of them that has nothing to do with the environment. And I'll give you one of my favorite examples is, how many of you are familiar with the marshmallow test? This is like the study of our generation, right? It's so cute. Walter Mischel, just the brief version for those of you that don't know. We think this is self-control, and it does a decent job. It's such a simple task. In the easiest form, we basically take preschool kids, and we bring them into a room, and adult comes in and says, hey, look, you want this marshmallow or, whatever candy? Of course, the kid says yes. They say, okay, you can have that, or if you'll wait for a little while, until I come back, I'll actually give you 2 or 3 or whatever. You kind of raise the limit until the kid's like, absolutely, I want that many. And then the adult leaves the room. And there's basically you just watch how long the kid will sit there and not eat the marshmallow. And we'll usually only let them wait for 15 minutes, because otherwise it's kind of torture and probably violates some kind of Geneva Convention. But it's, so we just sit there, right? And it's so cute. The kids are just like, oh, the marshmallow. And one kid licked it and put it back. And, I thought that was the most brilliant he should get tons of credit for that. Okay, but how long you wait, on average, correlates with so many things we care about. How well you'll do in school, how adjusted you are socially. We've even done follow-up studies 40 years later from kids that were in the original preschool studies and correlated with their socioeconomic status and their happiness and in their marriage and everything, right? So we're obsessed with it. But we interpret it as we have self-control. Some kids have more self-control than other kids, right? And that's the end of it. Except for probably one of my most favorite studies that's been done in the last few years that deserves much more attention was done by a colleague of mine named Celeste Kidd, the University of Rochester. So before she was a scientist, she worked in a homeless shelter for families. And she heard about the marshmallow study, and it really bothered her because she felt like, those kids would eat the marshmallow immediately. But maybe not because they lack self-control, but because in that environment, if you had something, odds are a bigger kid's going to take it from you, or maybe even an adult. So being a good scientist, instead of just worrying about it, she developed a really clever study. And here's all she did. She did the original marshmallow study, but before that, she had 2 groups of kids, and they got to do an art project. They got a little mug that they get to decorate. And each group was given busted up crayons, kind kind of crummy stuff. And they were told, hey, look, if you'll wait, don't draw on your cup yet. If you'll wait, I'm going to go out. We have a brand new art set with stickers and all kinds of things. If you'll wait, you can have that, and you can decorate your cup. Then they leave, and then they come back. And in one group, the adult keeps their word, brings the stickers back. In the other group, the adult comes back and says, oh my goodness, I'm so sorry, we don't have the art set. Then you do the marshmallow task. And here's what she found. In the group where the adult keeps their word, these kids were rock stars of self-control. In fact, in the entire group, all but one of them waited the entire 15 minutes. In the group where the adult didn't keep their word, all but one ate the marshmallow within the first minute. For me, this has profound implications, right? Take context seriously. Well, what is self-control then? It's so easy to think it's something a kid has, when in this case, to me, it suggests something about the environment. So sometimes, when I say context matters, and we're in this new science, we focus on looking at patterns in context, it can feel really complicated. And people say, that sounds good, but won't it just make it really hard to understand? And you know what? It turns out, more often than not, it simplifies and clarifies. Let me show you what I mean by telling you my next favorite study. How many of you have ever seen this? You know what a stepping reflex is? Okay, here's what it is. This little kid, if you can barely see it, when a kid is born, if you hold them upright on the ground, they have a reflex that makes it look like they're walking. So I with my little kid, I did this, and I was like, this is amazing. Like, I didn't know there was a stepping reflex. I just thought my kid was, like, awesome, right? So I'm no kidding. I call my mom, who's a nurse, and I was like, Mom, Austin's walking. And she's like, he's 1 month old. Like, I was like, I know. Like, and we took pictures, and she goes, Todd, look, every kid does this. It's called the stepping reflex. Don't worry, it'll go away. And I was like, sure enough, about 2 months later, gone. Only to come back right before he learned to walk. So this disappearing stepping reflex puzzled not just me, but scientists for generations. We just didn't know. Why would a reflex disappear? It's the only reflex that ever does. So we were trying to figure this out, and in the 1960s, we thought we figured out the solution on average. We thought it was brain maturation. When you correlate a bunch of kids, look at this, the theory was your frontal lobe matures and it suppresses the reflex. And then it comes back under voluntary control, sorry, I'm gonna get water, when kids learn to walk. It's called a pregnant pause for effect. And we thought we knew. And so the problem was, if your kid's stepping reflex doesn't go away around 2 months, that means your kid has brain problems. They're developmentally delayed, and we would send them for remediation. So we thought we knew, and no progress was made on the stepping reflex for 30 years. And then Esther Thalen, one of the pioneers in this new science out of Indiana, realized this seems a little too cute, right? Like, not quite, like, it seems too simple. So she says, look, let's put kids in context. And she did. It is awesome. She takes these little kids of different sizes and ages and stuff. She puts them on a treadmill, which is hilarious, by the way. She puts them in water for buoyancy. She manipulates, looks at their jaggedness and different contexts. And she figures out it has absolutely nothing to do with brain maturation at all. It was chubby thighs. Turns out, around 2 months of age, every little kid gets a burst of subcutaneous fat in their thighs, and they just can't lift their legs when you hold them up. That's it. And we have this precise mathematical relationship. Now, we know exactly when every single kid anywhere in the world is going to lose their stepping reflex and when it will come back. And the thing is, I think it's hilarious, but taking context seriously simplified it. We had this complex explanation that involved brain maturation, and it was chubby thighs. And then we would send kids to remediation that didn't lose their stepping reflex, and then they got better, and we're like, look how great we are, right? Nothing was wrong, right? So sometimes context simplifies and clarifies where averages obscure and make it more complicated. The final principle is called the pathways principle. And simply stated, individual kids vary in their pacing and their sequencing for any kind of outcome, naturally. And as a result, there is always, always, always more than one pathway to achievement. Always. Whether it's learning to walk, or whether it's learning to read, or anything. There's always more than one pathway. Always. But here's the problem. In education, in social sciences, when we rely on averages, it always guarantees you'll get one pathway. We get this kind of ladder model, right? The average pathway, that's all you can see. And so what we think is, there's one right way to do things, and kids can only differ in how fast they move down that path. And we think for sure that fast means smart. I mean, that is so built into our educational system, and it's not accidental. So the father of educational psychology and our standardized system, Edward Thorndike, who was obsessed with averages and rank, believed deeply that intelligence was nothing more than how fast your brain could make connections, and that you had a good brain or a mediocre brain or a bad brain, very one-dimensional. And he built that into the system in terms of how much time we give kids to learn. Do you ever wonder, like, who came up with how much time kids get for, say, a standardized assessment? Like, I'll tell you exactly where all of this comes, or how long they get to learn material. It is honestly based on how long it takes the average kid in a representative sample to finish. Thorndike believed, again, fast was smart. And his reasoning was, hey, look, if we peg it to the average, sure, smart kids will be bored sometimes, but it's no use giving more time because these kids won't be smart enough to take advantage of the extra time anyway. So it would be still morally repugnant even if it was true that fast equals smart. But from this new science where we focus on individuals instead of averages, I can tell you it is absolutely not true. Like, shockingly not true. This was hard for me, to be honest. I thought, come on, there's got to be some relationship. Maybe even just a little relationship. It's just not true. It's not there. There's no relationship between pace and ability. And we've known this for a while. If you can see this is actually some individual data taken from Benjamin Bloom's work in the 80s. His work is worth revisiting. He invented mastery learning and other things. And there's like 5 kids that were learning algebra concepts toward mastery. And you won't be able to see 2, I apologize, but this kid's plugging along. He gets the class exam, the sort of arbitrary time that we're going to say, this is when we're going to stop the music and assess you, right? The kid scores 32%. Like, he's clearly doesn't understand, right? Except for this was a self-paced environment. And so they let it play out a little longer. And here's the thing. It would be one thing if this was unique. Every time we've introduced flexibility into learning environments, we see this exact same thing. If you've never seen Sal Khan's TED Talk, it's really worth watching. With Khan Academy, he found the same thing. These kids that look like they're slow and don't know much, with a little bit more time, suddenly become rock stars. And he's pretty convinced that most of what high achievers accomplish are often accidents of time, is what he called it. So we have, just in closing here, we have clear evidence that averages don't work as a foundation for education. I think we have a better science and better principles for thinking about building better educational systems that understand kids. As a scientist, I have to admit, I used to think that being right was good enough. That somehow we have the data, we know this, it will just happen. That's pretty naive, I'll admit it, but I believe that. I decided to write a book for the general public and to start a nonprofit to drive this into the public and this conversation because of the last story I want to tell you, which is the Air Force was not actually the first group that figured out there was no such thing as an average body size. 7 years before, in the 1940s, the head of the American Gynecological Association, Robert Dickinson, who was obsessed with averages like everybody else, decided he wanted to create a statue of a typical American woman. So he collected data on a whole bunch of dimensions of size from 18,000 women of a certain skew for sure, younger and all this, and decided he's going to create a statue. And he was going to send it around to medical schools and everything. And he created it, and he called it Norma. And here it is. It created an overnight sensation. Norma was paraded around on talk shows and discussed all over the country for months and months and months. And it got to a fevered pitch that they decided to have a national contest to find Norma. So what they did was they took 9 most obvious dimensions of size, and they ran advertisements in newspapers and asked women to measure themselves and send in their dimensions. And the winner would get a $100 war bond. And they were so convinced that there would be so many women who were normal, an average that is, that they had all these elaborate rules for what happens for the tie. So the YMCA was brought in to be the judge of, okay, if there's 1,000 women who are average, how are we going to pick the winner? Turns out the winner was a woman named Martha Skidmore. She was only average on 3 of the 9 dimensions. And she was the winner. Not a single woman was average on even these 9 dimensions. And these were women who thought they were average enough to send in their dimensions. So you'd think right there, they get the exact same data that Gilbert Daniels got with the Air Force. This could have been the end of some silly view of average female body size. Instead, Bruno Gebhardt, the physician in charge of the whole contest, said, I know what the problem is. American women are profoundly unfit. And he said, exercise is the key. And no kidding, they created miniature versions of Norma and created a PE campaign for high school girls where young women were measured against these dimensions and tailored PE exercises to make them closer to Norma. By the way, for us, those of you, if you would visit Boston, you can see this statue at the Harvard Medical School. We're very proud, obviously. So the thing is, that actually shook me because it's not enough to be right. The interpretation matters quite a bit. So when I say that I think the barrier is this mindset, this is why I wrote the book. This is why we're focused on this work of getting beyond average, because we now can collect unbelievable amounts of precise data on individual kids, and we are. And we can head in that direction. And you know what? There's kind of this naive belief often in the tech environments that if we just collect more data, we'll get to personalization. I don't buy it. I think we have the potential, but the mindset is going to matter. And I think this, just in closing, we've got the technology, it's already here, we've got the ability to collect data, it's going to happen. The thing we know for sure is it will not be neutral. If we double down on a mindset of average, if we go the way of Norma, we will use the technology to create environments that exacerbate inequality. But we can make a better choice, right? We can use this insight and stuff to create environments that ensure equity and excellence. But to do that, you got to get beyond average and focus on understanding individual kids. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. And in the spirit of recognizing that we're all currently in kind of cockpits that can't actually be moved in this space right now in a convention center, please feel free to move around and sit on the ground or stand up and move around, whatever you need to be a learner in this space today. And now I have the great honor of bringing up Jamie Stewart, who will take a dive into alt schools and share a little bit about how they're reimagining education there. Thanks.
No big deal following that up today. I know Rachel opened with that she might not have permission to promote this book today, but I am free to, as far as I know. I can't say enough before I start, as an educator working in a classroom right now, how inspiring reading this book has been. I got it 2 weeks ago, and I've read it 3 times. I think we get to embody every day as educators the excitement of being in a classroom and believing in the work that we're doing, but to know that there are people and really understand that there are people out there working to help us articulate this and to help share has been really exciting. So I will share a little about who I am and what I'm doing at Alt School, and then show you a couple of our campuses. After that, we have a discussion from some panelists, and I'm really thrilled to hear about their ideas and ways that we all can continue to work together. So I started at Alt School about 18 months ago, having previously taught for public schools, first in Washington, D.C., and then in San Francisco. I loved it. I was a special education teacher predominantly, and really felt, I see a lot of people I've taught with in the audience, and this is so much fun. I felt really inspired by the work that I was doing every day. I got to work with really, really smart individuals who cared a lot and put in a lot of time to understanding the ways we can make teaching and learning better. But I began to feel, as the end of my 7th year of teaching kind of came to a conclusion, that there might be more we can do to understand teaching and learning. And sort of on a quest to discover whether or not that was true, I came across Alt School, which is a tech company in California, based in California, that is opening what we call micro schools. And a micro school is anywhere between, right now, 20 to about 100 plus students, with the principle that we can do better when it comes to understanding individuals and when it comes to personalizing education, which is exciting. There's still a lot of work to be done, and sort of in that spirit, and I don't want to get this wrong, so I wrote it down. Todd says in his book, we can encourage local experimentation and sharing of successes and failures to accelerate discovery. And that really spoke to me, and I want to make sure that I articulate this at the beginning, that we at Alt School do believe that it's going to be, our success will be based on our sharing of success and failure, that this is not the end-all be-all, this is not the final answer, but that we are hopefully working towards this understanding of the individual, and that we are sharing this, and that we are sharing our understanding, and that we're eliciting feedback and welcoming people into the conversation and into what we're learning. Because there are lots and lots and lots of schools and institutes doing similar work that are just outstanding. So at Alt School, we have a core approach, and I'll walk you through it hopefully very quickly so I can show you some of the pictures of our kids and our teachers. The 5 core principles: first, personalization, that in order to reimagine education, we need to start with the individual. And there are lots of ways to go about this. Everybody is different, and we actually don't agree as a nation and a world about what the dimensions that are the most important are right now. And so we're lucky we live in a time where we can rely on technology and on experts and experience to help us understand what those dimensions are. And then moving into a whole child approach to education, that to understand is a really good place to start, but then to know what 21st century skills are going to be the most important going forward. Do we teach social emotional learning at what rate compared to academic learning? And they live hand in hand, and we need to understand all of that as we understand a child, and we need to teach to all of that as we understand children. But we do still live in an age where rigorous academics are really important. They are the measure that tells us when a student is ready for high school and when a student is ready for a specific college. And there are really valuable reasons to continue to teach multiplication and addition, and to teach that on a pathway that we've all agreed on. We rely on Common Core standards as part of our backbone of the system as an example of that. And then moving on to sort of our context pathways approach at Alt School, we are community-based. A micro school exists, and one of the most exciting things about it is that it exists in little pockets of communities. Where I work right now in Brooklyn Heights, we exist above a pizza shop. And it's cool because our friends have pizza that they can give us, and when you're 6 years old or 30 years old, that's awesome. But you also become a part of that community, and our environment all of a sudden is not just a classroom, and it's not just a school, and it's not just a pizza parlor, it's all of it combined, and it's knowing we can grab our students and take them to the flower shop if someone asked a question and we can't answer it about how to take care of a flower or what the parts of a leaf are. And that context, being able to give students that flexibility in a learning environment has really changed the way that I view teaching and learning and the power of how we see students. Lastly, and this ties back into that community-based, we really value an interdisciplinary project-based approach to education. We have students ranging from pre-K, pre-kindergarten, to 8th grade, depending on our campus site. And each of those students experiences during the school day a mixture of both project-based learning time and then again, more rigorous skills-based academic work. But the more we teach, the more we've learned, the more we grow as a network of schools, the more we understand that context, that project-based piece, that emergent, enriching experience is where we see students learn the most. And that is nothing new to education. There's a lot of research behind that. But from a personal level, being able to witness that in real time has changed my approach as an educator. And I'll talk more about that as we look at some of our students and teachers. This is Alt School Brooklyn Heights, and as I mentioned before, we exist above a pizza parlor. And actually, to get down to some of our systems, some of our switches and things, you go through the kitchen to the pizza parlor, which is nothing I had experienced before and has led to a lot of really enriching conversations with students about what it looks like to work in a restaurant, what it looks like to work somewhere outside of their realm of experience. And it's neat to see kids experience that and start to ask questions about that. All of a sudden, everybody wanted to be a pastry chef, and then everybody wanted to own a business, and then everybody wanted to be the builders, the construction workers, and to be able to provide a really meaningful interaction for students along those levels, you can see at a really young age start to open up their belief in themselves and their curiosity about the world and drive really fun conversations. This picture is so good. I was talking earlier to the group of people who I get to spend today with about the experience from an educator's perspective of getting to teach in a more community-based, flexible environment. And there are a couple of things I want to point out about this picture. First of all, the little girl there with the wonderful expression on her face came to school presenting as someone who was really shy. Her parents spoke a lot to us over the summer about how they really, really wanted to find ways to help her feel more comfortable communicating with a wider range of people. She's 6 years old, so they were in no hurry for that to happen, but they had expressed that was a goal of theirs. And over the course of the first couple of months of school, her class went on tons of field trips out into the community. They spent time down by the Hudson River looking at people diving into the water and swimming around. And they spent time talking to a manners expert who taught them what it looks like to be and act and interact at a restaurant. And they also went to a place called Construction Kids. It was new to me as somebody new to New York. It's an environment that gives kids real tools. It gives them hammers and nails and saws and lets them just go for it after some really explicit training. And from a teacher's vantage point, we took students ranging from 5 years old to about 8 years old. I couldn't sleep the night before. I was like, this is not a good idea. But we got there, and we saw kids who were presenting as shy or presenting as inattentive in the classroom blossom and ask questions and run around and interact with their peers and focus for hours. And that moment, it was about 2 months into the school year, sparked a conversation amongst my teachers and myself within our school site about how we can, we need to capture this. We need to bring this in as part of our understanding of our students. And then how do we do that? Still a big question that's out there. And two, how can we recreate these kinds of environments for our kids in other places to start to bring that comfort and familiarity into the environments where they might still need practice with those things. And so this classroom right here had we purchased a workbench and started bringing in those same tools for the students to use in their classroom so they could share with other people. You can tell she's just the happiest person in the whole wide world. Another learning that we have had over the last couple of years, this is our third year of being a network of schools. The wall behind her, it looks sort of accordion-y, is a movable wall. And at our Brooklyn Heights site, we're shaped as like a donut on the second floor of a building. And you can actually physically move the walls that separate the classrooms. And I feel like this speaks to a lot of things that we have learned, we collectively across the years as educators, where there was a movement for a while to have really open spaces, and then people decided that that wasn't working for noise and circulation and whatever other reasons. And so classrooms moved back to being more modular. And the answer might be, who knows, that actually students need to experience all of these kinds of environments where their environment can change and can be different depending on the day or the activity or their interaction and need. And so one example of something we're kind of looking at right now. So happy. Another aspect that we are looking at, and this speaks a lot again to the Todd talk, about using technology to capture what students are learning and capture what students are doing on a daily basis in their classroom. And we rely on a couple of different things. We have what we call alt video, and that is a video capturing device that is available only to educators, where we can go back and take moments like this, where I've got a small group of students. My co-teacher and I were at different tables doing different reading groups at that time. We can use that tool to observe the conversations that were happening when we weren't present. And we can use that tool to go back and ask questions and plan for the lessons about experiences that, yeah, again, we were not firsthand there to see. We can also talk about the way students interact differently when there is a teacher present in their small group versus how they interact when there isn't a teacher present. And it's, when you're a group of 6- and 7-year-old boys, very, very different. One really important thing to also note when we talk about building, we value deeply at Alt School when we talk about building classrooms that are community-based and that are contextually different and expose students to a lot of different pieces of their environment, is that we as a staff at Alt School and that our students and families represent the diversity of the neighborhoods that they exist in. And that we want to, as part of looking at the whole child, understand how we can best do this. And I only bring this up now because I'm excited to hear from panelists today and people, everybody going forward, what it looks like to have diverse classrooms and the importance of it being there. Valuable conversation. This is a middle school classroom, and the next two slides are just really quick examples of what environment looks like and how micro schools can look different and be shaped by the students and adults and dimensions in it. So the year previously, this whole space was completely open. It had about 30 middle school students. It was a lot of fun. They interacted in really neat ways as they moved around the space and with different teachers. But based on feedback from the students and educators, we learned as a collective that having more modular classrooms, but that you can't really tell from here, but the walls are all glass, where students can still see and interact and understand what's going on in different spaces, they have a space that feels like their own. We are constantly sort of iterating on what we learn, and from year to year, environments are one of the things that will continue to change and adapt as we learn more and as the education world learns and understands more about teaching. And then another example of what spaces look like based on community and different student needs and interactions. This is another middle school environment where the students in this space wanted a maker tinkering interaction with how they shared what they know. So the things, as opposed to the other middle school space where the students are really into writing and sharing information that way, this group of students wanted physical products. And so we were able to, give that environment. And then another space where students can go to be immersed and engaged with each other and work in parallel to peers who might be doing something different in another classroom and space. I think I could gush on and on about and ask questions forever about the work that we're doing. But one of the questions I get asked the most is, why is alt school different, or how is alt school different? I think I tend to give specific examples to answer that question, but after reading Todd's book, I now have a better way to articulate what that is in my own experience. And that's before coming to alt school, and even as a special education teacher, and without knowing it, I was teaching to the average. I was giving standardized tests to help diagnose students with or without disabilities and to provide services based on averages. And now I can take a step back from the work that I get to do on a daily basis at alt school and really recognize that I'm in a lucky position to be able to and have the support to teach to the individual. There's still a lot of work and a lot of understanding to go into what that means and how we fully capture that, which is why I'm super, super excited to hear what the panelists have to say next. So Rachel, you wanna, thanks.
Thank you so much, Jamie. Come on up. Well, we're kind of transitioning into our next part where we get to, kind of like Todd said, where we know that a lot of this is happening already, and we have the choice now to go in two different directions. We can take all of this innovation that's happening and we can move in a direction of reimagining and moving beyond average, or we can continue to perpetuate what has happened as we continue to move in what we've done in thinking about this average person. And so we have people with us today who are innovating and reimagining in the work that they are doing. And so that was a quick transition. My teacher mind was like, and while they're transitioning, I'm gonna have all of you turn and talk, but you're welcome to, still you can kind of chitter chatter and talk while we're on the panel if that helps you to process, but they're very fast. So to launch us into our first question, I really want to get to know, we're so happy to have y'all with us today along with Jamie and Todd, and would love to know a little bit about who you are and what brought you to the work that you're doing, and why you're here in this conversation today. So I think we'll just start off with Johanna here and then just kind of go down the row, introduce yourself, and share in about a minute or so a little bit about that.
Great. Hi, everyone. My name's Johanna Chase, and I'm currently an Associate Dean for Innovation Policy and Research at Bank Street College of Education. And I've had a circuitous path to Bank Street, like most paths. But what I think about when I think about teaching to the edges is my first year of teaching as a corps member over a decade ago in East New York, Brooklyn. I was an 8th grade math teacher. And I had a couple kids in my class who had IEPs and who were really struggling to do their homework, pay attention in class, and math being the polarizing subject that it is, often I think because of the way that it's taught, I kind of thought, oh, they just don't like math and they're not trying. And I saw an advertisement for a UFT, this is New York City, so it was the United Federation of Teachers, training session on algebra tiles, and honestly went because there was free food and I got per session to go to this training. And I brought it back to my classroom and thought, let me just try this out. Let me see if Crystal and Lakeisha will respond to this because I don't want them talking in my class. And it radically changed my experience working with a couple of students who were struggling with basic numeracy and struggling to understand integers, all of a sudden are doing 1- and 2-step algebra problems. And so, I started using algebra tiles for my entire class, and I had students who started doing binomials and trinomials in my 8th grade math class. And so that really made me rethink how I approach education. And I, prior to Bank Street, led special education for New York City Department of Education, where we let out some significant changes that promote universal design for learning that really, I feel like, was seeded in my 8th grade class.
Hello, everyone. My name is Vincent Zabala. I'm currently a leadership and design manager with Teach for Malaysia. And I actually have a similar sort of story. I also taught math in high school. And actually, my story of how I got into this work actually brings me all the way back to my 2nd year of teaching in Hawaii. And I think of a student, his name was Paul Kella, who he's actually this really big guy who, if you just imagine a football player in 9th grade. And he's actually this very sweet guy, not the impression that I got the first time I met him. But what stands out for me is throughout the year, he really struggled with his tests and how he did on quizzes. And I always see him frustrated. He would always participate in class and really try his best. But when it came to the quizzes and tests, he just really was very upset of how he did on these tests. And actually, towards the end of the year, I decided that I wanted to try this project that I did when I was actually in high school. One of my physics teachers had us do a music video to one of our physics topics. And I still remember it to this day because it's quite memorable. And it was to the tune of Britney Spears' Lucky, which I might be dating myself, but it was quite memorable. And I remember at the very, I gave this project to my class, and I actually saw how Paul Kella really took ownership of this project. He showed that he really got his group to work collaboratively with one another to actually get it done. And these are like character strengths that I actually didn't see throughout previously. And so what I realized is at the very end of the day, when we actually got to see the video projects, I saw how proud and how confident he had become as a result of this project. And so for me, it's just a reminder of like, if I hadn't done this project or given that opportunity, I wouldn't have seen that potential or that in Paul Kella. So thank you.
So my name is Siobhan Garcia. When Rachel said she would ask me this question, my immediate response in my mind was, how could I have done anything else? I feel like I was born into this work. And the reason I say that is because I'm of the communities that we currently serve and that we're really trying to level the playing field for. And so what I learned early on was a mentor, someone outside, took an interest in me and helped me see beyond my circumstance. And for me, education was a pathway out. And so the reason I became a teacher, I was taught public school, and I was an inclusion teacher in New York City and in Providence, Rhode Island for several years, was really figuring out how to bridge education and the communities that they're living and serving, and how can we, leverage mentors and partner them with teachers and also with other wraparound services that we know communities need if we're taking a whole child approach. And so much of my path has been either in the nonprofit sector or in schools, but also figuring out, how to make those communities talk to each other. And so in my current role at Big Brothers Big Sisters, really providing that hopeful leadership and guidance and stewardship around better serving students with learning differences and disabilities, but training volunteers in order to leverage their relationships really strategically, and what we've been saying, teachable moments. I know classroom teachers say that all the time, but it's really something I'm really pushing volunteers to also think about. Every interaction is an opportunity, and so how do we focus a lot of the work that Todd said and all these other non-cognitive skills to really push kids and support them to be successful in all areas of their life. And so that is how I'm still in this work. I think I answered that.
So I'm James Basham, Jamie Basham as most people refer, but we have two Jamies up here, so I'm going by James today. So I came into education as a student who was cured with dyslexia in quote-unquote 4th grade. So in 1st grade, I was diagnosed with a learning disability, dyslexia. In 4th grade, I was suddenly cured, which if anyone knows anything about dyslexia, it's impossible. So I went into education and struggled all the way through high school and eventually going to college with a focus on being an educator because I thought I would change the system. I would change the lives of students. in my classroom. And I became a teacher and realized it wasn't necessarily my teachers that were broken, it was the system that was broken. And so I went back to graduate school in order to, again, change the system. And luckily enough, I am now in a role where I'm doing my best to change the system. I'm called in throughout the world, throughout the US and the world, to redesign education from the ground up. And I work with educators, teachers across the country and across the world, as well as districts and states as they go through and imagine and reimagine what learning could look like in this new world. I'm happy to be at the University of Kansas. We have a great program there in the Department of Special Education, but I also run an executive director and co-founder of the UDL Implementation and Research Network, which is a global network of individuals that's coming together to kind of work alongside me in this mission.
Yeah. So, Jamie, as you just said, the way that the system is now is not designed for all learners. It's kind of designed for this average. And so I'd actually like to pitch this question first to Siobhan, but ask anyone else to jump in afterwards. But many of our students who do not fit this mold of average are at a significantly higher risk of dropping out of school, being bullied, and going to prison. And what is one thing that you've seen done in the work that you've done and in the communities that you're in that is really working to shift that?
That's a great question. I think the first thing is just acknowledging that this is a fact and that there are barriers to student success that are beyond the classroom. Environment is important, but it's environment on the way to school, at home. And so the biggest charge that we have through funding through the Oak Foundation and Duke Endowment, NE Casey, is to really take a step back and to train staff and volunteers on, one, to be aware of these very issues. So it's not enough to say, oh, you're failing in math, so we're going to get you a tutor. That's not your space. It's, why is that hard? So really figuring out, developing that aspirational thinking, really encouraging, and being that person to help connect school with these later outcomes. It's really hard to be in school for 18 years being labeled or mislabeled or not talked to, right? And to deal with those certain things. And so how do they persist? And so really trying to train our volunteers to be more adept at knowing that those are the challenges, but then actually giving them tools. These are the 3 things that you can do in your relationship that will help. And it's not just school, it's life. Right? And so also shifting that too, from an organizational perspective, when you hear academics, a lot of people think automatically grades, tests, and school, right? But we're taking a broader approach. It's the school valuing, it's the school belonging, it's why do you have to do this now? It doesn't make sense. What are the barriers to that success? So I think the biggest thing is this training. It's never been done before, but the agencies and the volunteers, they said it's clearly an identified need. And the feedback from the staff is, gosh, I wish I knew this earlier and more often. So I'd say developing a blended learning approach to train staff and volunteers on how to cope with these challenges within their relationships.
Yeah, definitely. I love your focus on the broader outcomes and not just focusing on academics, but recognizing that it actually is way beyond just the academics that we're teaching kids. Jamie or Johanna, do either of you have kind of some thoughts from Johanna, your work in New York Department of Ed or now at Bank Street that might kind of add on to that? And Jamie, I see you kind of looking like you have something too, so feel free to jump in right afterwards.
Well, I think Jamie's point about the systems really being broken or being designed to get the result that we're getting. In New York City, we led some significant reforms, and I would be remiss if I did not call out Lauren Katzman, Stephanie Downey-Toledo, and Ilana Siegel, who are sitting here today and were instrumental in making sure that those reforms became a reality, that asked schools to think about students as individuals and come up with more creative programs for their learning. And so, that sounds really wonderful and great to say. To actually do that required digging into the systems and understanding why our schools in New York City at the time, segregating over half of the students with disabilities for all day. And in New York City, half of the students with disabilities is 105,000 children. And so, it was really easy to approach that and think, oh, well, those principals don't care about those kids, they're just warehousing them. But to take a more, graceful approach and understand, well, if the paper which you have to fill out to identify a kid as having a disability only has 4 boxes on it, what is the school going to do but put the kid in one of those 4 boxes? If the budget, which is a real thing for a principal to consider and has a deep impact on what actually happens in a classroom, only has 3 categories for how schools get funding for special education, they're only going to think about those 3 categories. And so I think that looking at our systems as an opportunity to promote individuality and get out of the way, basically, of schools doing innovative work and of teachers coming up with flexible ways to meet kids' individualized needs is really critical at the systems level.
I think one of the things we can do is change the terminology. I think if we really stop thinking about students as students and talk about them as learners, it would really help us in thinking about providing the needs of all learners, right? So context really matters, is what Todd was talking about earlier. Our role as educators is to design environments that provide the context for success for all learners, right? And the administrator's role in this is to help support the systems to provide for that context, to allow the teachers to innovate. And what we need to do is designing and thinking about these learners and getting all learners to a successful state is to really think about how do we take these principles of individualization and personalization and apply them in our schools. And I think that's really what we have to move it to as a system.
Jamie, I love how you said that we need to think of our students as learners, all about that idea. And I also think that as teachers, we're learners. I think it's equally the same, that we're all learners. And so I'm wondering, Vince, starting with you, and then I would love to hear also from the perspectives of Bank Street and University of Kansas. We're thinking about teacher preparation and we think about the individualization of our learners, but our teachers all are jagged learner teachers, if we're thinking we're all learners. And how in teacher preparation have you been thinking about the jaggedness of the teacher learners that you are working with? And Vince, I know we've talked about this a lot, so I would love to start off with you on this.
Sure, yeah. I'll share. So one of the new sort of pilots that at Teach for Malaysia that we haven't done in previous years is in our training preparation just this past October is to really think in terms of the big picture of how actually are our teachers learning. And so one of the things we did is to get them to actually be aware of their own learning. So we started off our training with them to really understand how they learn best. We had them do this learner sketch activity, which is a really, really cool activity for them to do to identify their own strengths and areas of growth as a learner. And so what we did, the hope is that once they're aware, it will trickle down for them to really be in the mindset and understand actually how their kids are also very diverse learners in their own classrooms. And so to add on that, to sort of I guess, nurture their learning throughout our training program, we wanted them to also be very collaborative and be a community of learners. And so we had these professional learning communities where, once they've identified how they're progressing, or so throughout the whole program, they're sort of reassessing and reflecting on how they're developing throughout the whole process, and supporting one another, I think, is a big one, collaboratively, if their strength is in a particular area, to support one another in that, and also to develop each other in that. So.
Sure.
Jamie?
I think, and Todd highlighted this, Todd and I are friends, and so it was really hard for me to evaluate his book. But I think I've bought a case of them now and given them out to everyone I know. And we are actually doing a book study on it now as a faculty at the University of Kansas. So I'm going to advertise the book as well. One of the things I think we're thinking about is micro-credentialing. And if no one's heard about it, micro-credentialing is one where, and Todd talks about it in the book, but wherein you take the licensure and break it down into competencies, and then take the competencies, and then you're able to demonstrate those competencies as little micro components of the bigger licensure itself. And so we're thinking about how we can use micro-credentialing to really hone in on the skills that everyone really has to highlight the individual learner as a teacher and what they can bring into the context of the learning process. The other thing that I would like to highlight is the National Educational Technology Plan, which I helped author, so I'm a little biased in it. I really like it. But the National Educational Technology Plan also lays a framework out for thinking about how we do personalization in teacher education. And one of the number one components that we're missing, I can tell you as part of that process of redesigning and writing the new plan, was that it was really hard to kind of go throughout the United States and figure out where we're preparing really good teachers. We have like little pieces of it here and there and everywhere. And actually, I want to commend TFA because I think they're doing a great job in many areas in that space. But we have to redesign our faculty. We have to redesign the way we do teacher education, and some of that has to do with the way we prepare our leadership in order to prepare our teachers. And so that's another thing that we're spending a lot of time at the University of Kansas, specifically in the Department of Special Education, thinking about in how we've designed our doc program and have just gone through a redesign of the doc program. So if anyone's actually interested in a doctorate, come talk to me after.
At Bank Street, two things that I really want to highlight about our approach for training teachers that that are interrelated and take a stance on the teacher as a whole adult, like similar to how we approach working with children as whole children. And those are, one, all teachers in Bank Street's programs have a year-long clinical placement, and that gives them the opportunity to work with a mentor teacher and test out their skills before they're thrown into the classroom, like many of us were through Teach for America. And along with that, teachers participate in conference groups with a faculty advisor and a small group of teachers to actually investigate, reflect on what they're learning and what their experience is like as teachers. And I think this is really amazing. I work there. Stanford also just released a study. I'm not making this up just because I work there, highlighting core aspects of our teacher training program that have direct correlation to results in the classroom and to retention of teachers in the profession.
So I want to kind of take a turn, and this is a bit of a selfish one because it's something I'm personally recently very interested in. So I had the opportunity to learn how to code last week, which was absolutely wonderful. And Jamie, I know that computer science has been a huge part of the work that you've done in thinking about universal design for learning. And with Obama announcing the Computer Science for All and a ton of money behind that, which is incredibly important, specifically thinking about bringing in learners who potentially have not had access to this kind of personalized opportunity before. I think that there's going to be a huge movement here, and we're already seeing it. I would love to kind of know, how do you see innovations in how we're thinking about STEM and computer science education relating to reimagining education to move beyond average?
That's a great question. Yeah, it's an exciting time. It really is. It's absolutely amazing. I spend a lot of my time, so when I'm on campus, which isn't that often, but when I am on campus, I spend a lot of time over in computer science, working with engineers over there. And the reason I'm over there, and the reason I was initially over there, is that the technology industry right now is having a huge effect on the way that we're educating our kids. The tools that they're designing has a direct impact on how we are going through and educating kids. So I'm excited about this for multiple reasons. And I don't know if this is exactly the right thing to say, but I'm excited because, one, I think it's going to allow teachers to think more like engineers. Like when we get computer science and start coding in schools, and we start adopting it in the way that we're educating kids, we're thinking more like engineers. And what excites me about that is that when I'm out working with teachers around universal design for learning and implementing that in classrooms, oftentimes I'll be in front of a group of teachers, and it could range anywhere between 20 teachers to 100 teachers and beyond. And the teachers say to me, look, this is hard stuff you're teaching us. You're teaching us to think differently than we've ever thought before. And I'm just a teacher. And I said, whoa, you're not just a teacher. You're a learning engineer. We have to think differently, not only about the students that we teach and make them learners, but we have to have our teachers think more like learning engineers to design solutions, to personalized learning for all kids. And so that's one reason I'm excited. The other reason I'm excited is I think, the more kids that we can get involved in computer science, the better the future is going to be for all of us, because it's going to allow kids that wouldn't normally gravitate towards a job in computer science because it's just these boxes or these things they interact with on a day-to-day basis. They don't understand the components of them. The more we get kids engaged and thinking about the potential of computers and what computers can do and what mobile devices, et cetera, this technology can do, the better society we're going to have overall.
Totally agree. So I see that's kind of moving into the work that it sounds like you're kind of thinking about, continuing to think about over the next 6 months. And I would love to kind of move on with Siobhan, then Vince and Johanna. What's on the horizon for you? What are you thinking about? Maybe in light of the talk today, maybe you kind of shifted a little bit in what you're thinking about for the next 6 months of your work, but would love to know what's coming up for you coming out of this conversation.
Well, my dream world, Todd's book is required reading for all our volunteers and onboarding process.
We're really not trying to advertise.
We're really not. We didn't plan this, by the way. It just happened. So what's on the horizon? I think it's in line with these similar issues. It's how do you take this theory and how do you put it into practice? Like, what does that actually look like on the ground, given what we know? And I was thinking about this before. We know students who have mentors have higher self-esteem. They're less likely to be bullied because they know they have an advocate. I mean, so we know that mentoring is critical and important. It's the one-on-one person. But right now we're thinking about what does scalability and a rollout look like nationally? We have 300 agencies across the network, so how can we get this training out to everyone? What are the resources? What's the technology piece that we need? But also, staffing and coaching. What I've found in this work is so much of my job, before I can even have a conversation around content, is coaching around shifting your own mindset about what your role is in this space, similar to what you said. What's a mentor's role in this space? And so I think in the next 6 months, thinking about how much time do we need to just first have an honest conversation, what's the shared vocabulary, how are we all approaching this work, how are we coming to it, how are we looking at it? And then the next step is figuring out, okay, training capacity, and how do we get this message out? And simultaneously, it should be studied. So what is the data? Are we getting the reach? What's the impact more broadly? So I think the next 6 to 8 months will be tremendous, and I'll be calling all of you. But it's exciting and it's important work, and it's needed. It's desperately needed. So thank you.
Vince, same question.
Yeah, I think for me, what I was thinking about, and in terms of like the work that I'm doing, is also, and I actually also just want to say that the book really helped me to open my mind. I just want to say, because it really for me puts things. It's like something I can refer to. It's like a framework in thinking about. This average, and I think for me the mindset behind everything that was shared today is sort of like what I hope to bring to my colleagues and to our teachers in Malaysia, because I think it's such a simple idea, but not. And so I think I'll be thinking a lot about how do we take this and really apply this into our context in Malaysia, and what will we want to see in all the way down to the students level, like what can our teachers do to make this come alive. And so, and I think for me, I'm just really so happy to be here, to be part of this conversation, and just knowing that we're all sort of in this mindset is sort of like gonna fuel me a bit more to really share this and know that like other kids will have these similar opportunities. Yeah, thank you.
And I feel like I have to plug Todd's book right now, but I would say that actually, for me, what Todd's book has helped me reconsider is like my feelings of inadequacy when I don't fit into a particular size of dress or jeans or whatever. So I would just like ladies in the room read it for that purpose, if nothing else. But over the next 6 months at Bank Street, we are launching an early childhood research center that's focused on pursuing real questions that are deeply based in practice, and reporting findings in a way that are really applicable to practitioners. And one topic in particular, somewhat tangential actually to that research center, that a few faculty are pursuing, and I've been working with them on, is around trauma-informed practice in working with adults. And so a couple of really amazing faculty are doing a study on the adverse childhood experience scores of caregivers that work with infants and toddlers, and with the goal of designing professional development to support those caregivers as they may revisit some of their own traumatic experiences when they're working with kids.
Thank you. So we do not have time for a formal question and answer, but that's actually wonderful because we have a great opportunity to continue this conversation. And because I feel kind of like I'm trying to be Norma standing up here, Todd and Jamie, will you come join me? Thank you. That's okay, you don't need to be. I just want all of us up here. It's kind of like the finale, Anyway, we don't have the opportunity for question and answer right now with such amazing people for our kind of 3-part case study, but I do want to say that we have an opportunity to continue this conversation, and we really hope all of you join us. We are really excited. I don't think I actually introduced myself. Hi, my name's Rachel Brody. I lead our Diverse Learner Initiative here at Teach for America, and I am just so honored to be here with everyone, and we're really excited about partnering with Beyond Average, which is out of the Center for the Science.
The Center for Individual Opportunity.
Thank you. The Center for Individual Opportunity in Harvard's Mind, Brain, and Education program to launch a book club around the end of Average as, this first book that we're going to kind of look at now, and then we'll continue with other ones as well and have learning opportunities around this. So we want you all to join this. There are note cards in the back. Please write the questions that are on your mind because we'll bring those into that first book club chat. It's, this is an opportunity for us to all come together as a community. As I said at the beginning, all of you, we have so many people in this room who are literally doing this work right now, and we want to collaborate and learn and grow together. So please join us with that. And then also for any teachers in the room, we're going to be thinking a lot about the science of the individual in our Teach Beyond Fellowship for next year. For anyone who doesn't know about it, it was piloted this year in many different regions with one of my colleagues' teams, and it was hugely successful. There's a track for teacher coaches and a track for teachers, and we're really excited to be digging really deeply into jaggedness, context, and pathways for this fellowship next year. So those are just 2 opportunities to really continue to have this conversation. Like I said, please leave questions on the index cards, and we'll also be sending out, because we like to send out emails at Teach for America, we'll be sending out information to everyone who scanned in today for both of those opportunities. So I really just want to thank you all for engaging here with us today, and now I hope to see you all at the main event later and at all of the receptions that are happening this evening. So thank you. Let's do one round of applause to all of our panelists. And thank you all for joining us today.